I arrived at my own penthouse. My ex-wife and her new husband said loudly, "Who let him in? He's like mold. Keeps coming back." I didn't answer. Security came running to escort them out, not me. They couldn't understand what just happened. The elevator chimed open on the 42nd floor, and I swear to God, you could have heard a pin drop in that lobby if anyone had been classy enough to own a pin instead of whatever knockoff accessories they were sporting that afternoon. The silence hit different too. Not the peaceful kind you get at a spa or a library, but the awkward, suffocating kind that happens when everyone simultaneously realizes they've been talking trash about someone who just walked into the room. I stepped out onto that polished marble floor in my navy Tom Ford suit, the one that fit like it was stitched by angels who minored in geometry, holding a coffee that cost more than my ex-wife's new husband probably spent on his last 3 haircuts combined. Maybe 4, if he was still going to that strip mall barber who thought fade meant make it patchy. I didn't rush. I didn't announce myself. I just walked, letting my dress shoes click against the floor with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who signs the checks around here. And spoiler alert, it's me. The lobby was packed with the usual suspects. Trust fund kids pretending to have jobs, retired lawyers pretending to have hobbies, and my personal favorite, people who spent more time in the building's gym taking mirror selfies than actually lifting anything heavier than their own egos. They were all staring now, faces frozen somewhere between confusion and that special brand of horror you get when you realize you might have severely underestimated someone. And then, of course, there she was. Jessica, my ex-wife, standing near the concierge desk like she owned the place, which was hilarious considering I literally own the place now. But we'd get to that fun little reveal in a minute. She was wearing one of those outfits that screamed, "I have money," but whispered, "I'm also 3 credit cards deep in denial." Her voice cut through the silence like nails on a chalkboard, or better yet, like someone dragging a fork across a plate at a fancy restaurant while everyone else is trying to enjoy their overpriced scallops. "Who let him in?" she announced loud enough for the people on the 41st floor to probably hear. "He's like mold. Keeps coming back no matter how many times you scrub it off." Oh, Jessica. Still dramatic. Still broke, even if she refused to admit it. Still acting like the universe revolved around her and her overpriced handbag collection. I almost laughed, but I'm a professional now, so I just took a slow sip of my coffee instead, letting the moment marinate. The thing about people like Jessica is they never learn that silence can be a weapon. They fill every gap with noise because they're terrified of what might happen if they actually had to sit with their own thoughts for 5 consecutive seconds. I didn't answer her, didn't even glance in her direction, which I knew would piss her off more than any comeback I could have delivered. When you've been married to someone for 3 years, you learn their triggers, and Jessica's biggest one was being ignored. She craved attention the way plants crave sunlight. Except plants actually contribute oxygen to the world, so really, there's no comparison. The lobby was still frozen, everyone waiting to see what would happen next, like this was some kind of reality TV show, and they were all extras hoping to get camera time. I could see Mark, the daytime concierge, practically sweating behind his desk, probably running through every possible scenario in his head and trying to figure out which one wouldn't get him fired. Poor guy. He was good at his job, always remembered names, always had packages ready before you even asked. I made a mental note to slip him a nice bonus later for having to deal with this circus. That's when I heard the footsteps. Heavy, purposeful, the kind that belonged to people who got paid to solve problems. Security. 3 of them, actually, all wearing those crisp uniforms that made them look like they moonlighted as Secret Service agents. They moved through the lobby with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd done this before, though probably not under these exact circumstances. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Everyone suddenly very interested in their phones or the abstract art on the walls that nobody actually understood, but everyone pretended to appreciate. Here's where it got good. Here's where karma showed up fashionably late, but with impeccable timing. The head of security, a guy named Frank who'd worked in the building for 15 years and had probably seen every kind of drama imaginable, walked straight past me. Didn't even pause. Just gave me a slight nod. The kind of nod that said, "We're cool, boss," and continued right toward Jessica and her new husband, whose name I think was Rick or Dick or something equally forgettable. The guy had the personality of unsalted crackers and the spine of a chocolate eclair. "Good evening, Mr. Hart," Frank said, his voice carrying across the lobby with perfect clarity. "We'll escort the unauthorized guests out now." I watched Jessica's face cycle through about 17 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion came first, then disbelief, followed by the dawning horror of someone who just realized they'd been playing checkers while everyone else was playing chess. Her jaw dropped so fast I thought I heard gravity actually clap. Or maybe that was just the sound of her pride shattering into a million tiny pieces on that expensive marble floor. Rick tried to puff his chest out, tried to do that thing insecure guys do when they want to seem tough, but don't actually know how to be tough. It deflated about halfway through, like a balloon someone had forgotten to tie properly. "Now wait just a minute," he started, but Frank was already gesturing toward the elevator, and the other two security guards had positioned themselves in that way that made it very clear this wasn't a negotiation. "There must be some mistake," Jessica managed to sputter, her voice climbing about 3 octaves higher than usual. "We live here. We have every right to be here. He's the one who shouldn't be allowed in this building." I could have jumped in, could have explained everything right then and there. But where's the fun in that? Instead, I just stood there, sipping my coffee, watching the scene unfold like it was the season finale of my favorite show. Watching them get escorted out of what used to be, well, what they thought was still, their penthouse was honestly the most peaceful cardio I'd ever done. Better than yoga, better than meditation, better than those overpriced wellness retreats where people pay thousands of dollars to sit in silence and find themselves. As Frank guided them toward the elevator, Jessica kept twisting around, trying to make eye contact with me, probably hoping I'd intervene or at least acknowledge the absurdity of the situation. But I just raised my coffee cup slightly, a tiny salute to the universe's sense of humor, and smiled. Not a big smile, not a gloating smile, just a small, satisfied smile that said everything that needed to be said. The elevator doors closed on Jessica's protests and Rick's impotent indignation, and just like that, the lobby came back to life. People started moving again, whispering to each other, probably already composing texts and social media posts about what they'd just witnessed. Mark behind the concierge desk looked like he'd just survived a near-death experience, and I made my way over to him. "Interesting afternoon," I said casually. Mark managed a weak smile. "Welcome home, Mr. Hart. Welcome home indeed." Mold always finds its way back, and sometimes it brings the deed to the building with it. As the elevator doors slid shut behind Jessica and Rick, or Dick, honestly, I still wasn't sure and didn't care enough to check. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall panels of the lobby. You know those mirrors they install in expensive buildings that somehow make everyone look better than they actually do? Like they've got some kind of Instagram filter built into the glass. Yeah, I was standing there looking at myself, and for once, I actually liked what I saw. Calm, controlled, maybe a little smug, sure, but in a polite, revenge served cold on marble floors with a side of poetic justice kind of way. My tie was straight. My hair was doing that thing where it looked expensive without looking like I tried too hard. Even my posture screamed, I've got my life together and a decent investment portfolio. 2 years ago, almost to the day, those same people, Jessica and her crew of enablers and social climbers, had kicked me out of this exact building. Well, technically the building management had done the physical kicking, but Jessica had been the one orchestrating the whole performance like she was conducting a symphony of humiliation. I remember that day with the kind of clarity that makes you wonder if trauma just burns certain memories into your brain with a blowtorch. They'd called me a charity case with bad luck and worse taste, which was rich coming from people who thought decorating with live, laugh, love signs counted as having personality. I can still see it playing out in my head like some kind of twisted movie I never wanted to be the star of. Me, carrying cardboard boxes that were too heavy and too full because I'd run out of packing tape and had to use that cheap clear tape that doesn't actually stick to anything. Walking past Jessica's designer heels. Those red-bottomed Louboutins she'd bought with what was technically our joint account, but practically her personal shopping fund. She'd been standing there in the lobby, arms crossed, wearing sunglasses indoors like she was some kind of celebrity hiding from paparazzi, except the only cameras around belonged to the building's security system. Her boyfriend at the time. Yeah, she'd already moved on before the divorce papers were even filed, because apparently that's what people with traditional values do these days, had been there too. Some finance bro named Chad or Brad, or one of those names that sound like a tennis grunt. He was wearing a polo shirt with the collar popped, which should be illegal in all 50 states. And he had this smirk on his face like he'd just won a championship he didn't even know he'd entered. The guy had the personality of a wet cardboard box and the emotional depth of a parking lot puddle. But apparently he had enough money to make Jessica forget about little things like loyalty and marriage vows. "Need any help packing?" he'd asked, that smirk getting wider, and I could hear the condescension dripping off every word like syrup on pancakes. Except this syrup was poisoned and the pancakes were made of spite. I'd looked at him, looked at Jessica, looked at the boxes in my arms, and said the only thing my pride would allow me to say at that moment. No. Just that. No explanation. No additional commentary. Just a flat, definitive no. Because even when you're at rock bottom, even when you're being escorted out of what used to be your home by security guards who are trying really hard not to make eye contact, you've still got to have some standards. I prefer doing my own heavy lifting, always have. Builds character. Also prevents you from owing favors to people who would absolutely hold it over your head for the rest of your natural life. The lobby had been full that day too, packed with residents and their guests, all of them watching the show like I was the afternoon's entertainment. Some of them had the decency to pretend they weren't staring, suddenly becoming very interested in their phones or the potted plants that probably cost more than my car at the time. Others just straight up gawked, probably already mentally composing the text messages they'd send to their friends about the poor bastard getting kicked out. I'd made 3 trips up and down that elevator, each one more humiliating than the last, and by the end of it, my back was killing me, my pride was demolished, and I'd sworn to myself that if I ever made it back, it wouldn't be as someone's charity case or pity project. Now here I was, standing in that same lobby, except this time the name on the building's deed was mine. Adrian Hart. Not Reynolds Tower anymore. They'd renamed it Hart Tower about 6 months ago, right after the acquisition went through and all the legal paperwork got sorted out. I'd kept it quiet, didn't make a big announcement, didn't throw some tacky party with champagne fountains and ice sculptures. Just changed the name and updated the official records like you'd update your phone number. Clean. Professional. Understated. Funny how property transfers and karma share a delivery schedule. Like they're both using the same cosmic Amazon Prime account, and someone finally paid for expedited shipping. I walked over to the seating area where they had those uncomfortable modern chairs that looked like art installations but felt like sitting on geometric punishment. Nobody was sitting in them. Nobody ever sat in them, because they were designed by some minimalist architect who'd apparently never experienced the human need for lumbar support. But they photographed well, and that's what mattered in buildings like this. I set my coffee down on the glass table, watching the condensation ring form, knowing the cleaning staff would wipe it away in approximately 4 minutes, because that's how often they did rounds in the lobby. Mark was still behind the concierge desk, trying to look busy but obviously dying to say something. The guy had been working here since before I'd moved in the first time, back when I was still married and still naive enough to think expensive zip codes meant something about your worth as a person. He'd always been decent to me, even during the eviction, which is more than I could say for most people in this building. Hell of a thing, huh? I called over to him. He glanced around like he was checking for witnesses, then walked over, lowering his voice even though the lobby was basically empty now. "Mr. Hart, I've got to say, I've been working in luxury buildings for 23 years, and I've never seen anything quite like that." "Like what? The eviction then, or the eviction now?" "Both. Neither. I don't know, man." He shook his head, and I could see he was trying not to smile. "When you left 2 years ago, she was up here every day for a month, making sure everyone knew you were gone. Talking about how she'd upgraded her life, how she'd moved on to better things." Better things meaning what? A guy who thinks craft beer is a personality trait. Mark actually laughed at that, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle people give when they're trying to stay professional. "You want to know the really funny part? Last week, she was in the lobby on her phone, loud as always, complaining about the new building management. Said they were unreasonable and clearly didn't understand who she was. I wanted to tell her right then who signed my paychecks now, but Frank told me to let it play out naturally. Frank's a smart man. Give him a raise. You're the boss now. You can give him a raise yourself. Boss. Owner. The guy whose signature determined whether the lobby got fresh flowers daily or weekly. Whether the gym equipment got upgraded or stayed vintage. Whether certain former residents got to stay or got an express ticket to the curb. It was surreal, honestly. Like I'd stepped into an alternate universe where past Adrian had won the lottery and present Adrian was just catching up with the program. I picked up my coffee, which was still somehow the perfect temperature despite the chaos of the last 15 minutes. You know what the weirdest part is, Mark? I don't even feel that good about it. I thought I would. Thought it'd be this big, triumphant moment where I felt vindicated and powerful and all that stuff they talk about in those revenge movies. But mostly I just feel tired. That's probably because revenge isn't actually as satisfying as people think, Mark said, leaning against the desk. It's just closure wearing a fancy outfit. When did you become a philosopher? 23 years watching rich people destroy each other in slow motion. You pick up things. I raised my coffee cup to him in acknowledgement. Mold doesn't just come back. Sometimes it comes back with the keys to the whole damn kingdom. Back then, I was broke. And I'm not talking about the cool, inspirational kind of broke that people romanticize in motivational Instagram posts with sunset backgrounds and quotes in cursive fonts. I'm talking about the real, unglamorous, checking your bank account 3 times hoping the numbers magically changed kind of broke. The kind where you're living off instant noodles and what I like to call please wait till payday energy, which is basically just anxiety with a countdown timer attached. I was so broke I started recognizing the cashiers at the dollar store by name, and they started recognizing me, which is never a good sign when you're a grown man buying off-brand cereal and wondering if store-brand toilet paper is really that much worse than the fancy stuff. Jessica had taken everything in the divorce, and I mean everything. The condo with the view that made visitors think we were more successful than we actually were. The car, a BMW that I'd saved 2 years for and she'd driven maybe 6 times before deciding it wasn't her style anymore. She even took the dog, this golden retriever named Murphy who literally liked me better. I'm not being petty about this, it's documented fact. That dog would sleep at the foot of my side of the bed, would bring his toys to me, would lose his mind with excitement when I came home from work. But Jessica got him in the settlement because her lawyer was better than mine, which is just a nice way of saying she could afford someone who went to an actual law school instead of whatever online program my guy had stumbled through. Everyone told me to move on. Friends, family, that one cousin who sells essential oils and thinks she's a life coach because she read a self-help book once. Just move on, Adrian. They'd say, like moving on was as simple as changing channels or switching laundry detergent brands. There's plenty of fish in the sea, which is a terrible saying when you think about it, because the ocean is also full of trash and things that want to kill you. So maybe we should retire that particular metaphor. But I did move on, just not in the direction anyone expected. I moved straight into a business idea that nearly killed me before it paid off, which is apparently the only way good ideas work these days. You've got to almost die first. It's like a prerequisite or something. I'd been working in logistics for a company that shipped industrial parts, and I'd noticed something that everyone else seemed to have missed. The entire system was held together with duct tape and prayers. Companies were losing millions because their tracking systems were stuck in 1995, using software that looked like it was designed by someone who'd only seen computers in science fiction movies. So I did what any recently divorced, newly homeless, definitely desperate person would do. I built a logistics platform from scratch. So I did what any recently divorced, newly homeless, definitely desperate person would do. I built a logistics platform from scratch. In my studio apartment, which was really just a room with a bathroom attached and a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge that made concerning noises at 3 in the morning. I taught myself coding from YouTube videos and library books, because apparently when you're broke, you can't afford those fancy online courses that promise to make you a tech genius in 6 weeks. I spent 18-hour days staring at my laptop screen until my eyes felt like they'd been replaced with sandpaper, living off coffee that tasted like regret and whatever was on sale at the grocery store. The pitching to investors phase was its own special kind of hell. I must have sent out 300 emails to venture capital firms, angel investors, and anyone who'd ever invested in anything more ambitious than a lemonade stand. I got maybe 15 responses, and 12 of those were automated rejections that somehow still managed to feel personal. The other 3 were meetings that went about as well as you'd expect when you show up to a sleek downtown office wearing a suit you bought at a thrift store and pitch a logistics platform to people who couldn't even spell logistics without autocorrect. There was this one guy, venture capitalist named Preston Montgomery III, because of course there was a 3 in his name, who couldn't even be bothered to remember my name during the entire 30-minute meeting. He kept calling me Aaron and Andrew, and at one point just hey you. His office had windows that overlooked the entire city, the kind of view that costs more per month than most people's mortgages, and he sat there in his designer chair eating sushi that probably cost more than my rent, asking me questions like, but how do you monetize synergy? Which isn't even a real question, Preston. Synergy isn't a thing you monetize. It's a buzzword people use when they want to sound smart in meetings. I remember leaving that office, riding the elevator down 40 floors, walking out onto the street, and just standing there for a minute watching people rush past in their expensive clothes heading to their expensive lunches. I had $12 in my bank account. 12. I couldn't even buy the sushi Preston had been eating. I could maybe afford the little plastic wrapper it came in. But here's the thing about rock bottom. And this is going to sound like one of those inspirational posters they hang in corporate offices next to the dying plants. When you're at rock bottom, you've got nothing left to lose. It's weirdly liberating. All the fear about failing disappears because you've already failed by every conventional metric. Your wife left you. Your friends stopped returning calls. Your family looks at you with that mixture of pity and disappointment usually reserved for pets that keep having accidents on the carpet. So I kept going. I spent nights sleeping in warehouses, literally curling up on a sleeping bag between boxes of industrial equipment, because one of the warehouse managers, guy named Tommy who'd been in logistics for 30 years and had more common sense than every investor I'd pitched combined, believed in what I was building. He let me test my platform on his operations, gave me real-world data, actual problems to solve. While everyone else was at home dreaming about yachts and vacation homes, and whatever rich people dream about, I was in a warehouse that smelled like cardboard and motor oil, debugging code, and trying to figure out why the GPS tracking module kept thinking shipments were being delivered to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Tommy became my first real supporter. He didn't have money to invest. Warehouse managers don't exactly swim in disposable income. But he had something better, credibility. When I finally got my platform working, when I could show real results from a real warehouse operation, Tommy vouched for me. He made calls to people he knew in the industry, showed them the numbers, explained how my system had cut his processing time by 40% and reduced errors by even more. Those calls led to more meetings. Better meetings. Meetings with people who actually listened instead of checking their phones every 30 seconds. I landed my first client, a mid-sized shipping company that was desperate enough to try something new. Then another. Then another. The platform worked. The word spread. Suddenly, the same investors who'd ignored my emails were calling me, asking if I was still looking for funding, which is corporate speak for, we screwed up and now we want to pretend we didn't. Now those same investors who couldn't spell my name, looking at you, Preston Synergy Montgomery III, were begging me to sign autographs on contracts, like I was some kind of celebrity instead of just a guy who got tired of eating ramen and decided to do something about it. Life's funny like that. It gives you lemons, watches you struggle to make lemonade with no sugar and questionable water. Then if you hold on long enough and don't die from stubbornness, it lets you buy the entire orchard, the lemon processing plant, and Preston's fancy office building just for spite. While Jessica was busy posting pictures of her penthouse on Instagram with captions like "living my best life" and "blessings on blessings" accompanied by way too many sparkle emojis and hashtags that nobody actually searches for, I was busy doing something a little more substantial. I was buying the company that owned the building. The whole building. All 47 floors of it. Including the penthouse she was photographing from 17 different angles like she was running a real estate showing for her 3,000 followers who were probably mostly bots anyway. The acquisition took about 4 months from start to finish, which in the world of commercial real estate might as well be light speed. Normally these things drag on longer than a family dinner where someone mentions politics. Just endless negotiations and due diligence and lawyers arguing about comma placements and contracts like they're defending doctoral theses. But I had something most buyers don't have, motivation that went beyond just return on investment. I had spite. Beautiful, focused, financially backed spite. And let me tell you, spite is one hell of a motivator when you combine it with actual capital and a team of lawyers who bill by the quarter hour. My attorney, A woman named Patricia Chun, who could probably negotiate world peace if we paid her enough and gave her decent coffee, had looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I first told her what I wanted to do. We were sitting in her office, all glass and steel and those weird modern chairs that cost a fortune but feel like sitting on geometry, and I'd just laid out my plan to acquire Reynolds Property Group, the company that owned Hart Tower, which at that point was still called Reynolds Tower because I hadn't gotten around to the fun part yet. Let me get this straight, Patricia had said, taking off her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose in that way people do when they're trying to process something that seems simultaneously brilliant and insane. You want to buy an entire property management company, which owns 17 buildings across 3 states, just so you can own one specific building where your ex-wife currently lives? When you say it like that, it sounds petty. Adrian, it is petty. It's the most expensive petty I've ever seen. And I once represented a guy who bought a yacht just to park it in front of his business rival's beach house and block the view. Okay, but hear me out, I'd said, leaning forward in my chair. One of the few comfortable ones in her office, probably kept specifically for clients having minor breakdowns. Reynolds Property Group is actually undervalued right now. Their management's been cutting corners. They've got 3 buildings with major tenant complaints, and their stock price has been dropping for 18 months. This isn't just about revenge. This is about revenge that also happens to be a sound financial investment. Patricia had stared at me for a solid 10 seconds, then started laughing. Not polite laughter either. Real, genuine laughter that made her assistant peek through the glass door to make sure everything was okay. You know what? Fine. Let's buy a property company out of spite. I've handled weirder cases this month alone. The due diligence process was intense. We're talking hundreds of documents, financial statements going back a decade, property surveys, tenant agreements, maintenance records, and enough legal paperwork to fill a small library. I had a whole team working on it. Patricia and her associates, a commercial real estate specialist named David who drank energy drinks like they were water and probably had never experienced a normal sleep cycle, and a financial analyst who kept sending me spreadsheets so detailed I needed spreadsheets to understand the spreadsheets. Meanwhile, Jessica was completely oblivious. She was living in the penthouse, posting her little pictures, hosting her little brunches with friends who complimented her throw pillows and pretended to care about her opinions on Rose. She'd started a lifestyle blog, because of course she had, called Heart to Heart Living, which was using my last name for her brand even though she'd literally divorced me. The blog was exactly what you'd expect, poorly written posts about finding yourself after heartbreak and embracing luxury mindfully, accompanied by photos of her doing yoga on the balcony at sunset, filtered within an inch of reality. One of her posts from that time. I had my assistant Jason pull up the archive later because I'm petty enough to keep receipts, had been titled "This Penthouse is My Sanctuary." She'd written this whole thing about how the apartment represented her new chapter and how she'd manifested this abundance through positive energy and unwavering faith. No mention of the fact that she was living there because I'd paid the down payment during our marriage, or that her new husband Rick was 3 months behind on his share of the HOA fees, which I know because those records became my records once the acquisition went through. The day the deal finalized was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are typically boring in the business world. All the important stuff happens on Mondays or Fridays for dramatic effect. But this particular Tuesday was special. I was sitting in a conference room with Patricia, David, and about 6 other people whose job titles I still don't fully understand, signing document after document while a notary watched and officially stamped things. My hand cramped up around page 47. By page 80-something, I'd lost all feeling in my fingers. But by the final signature, I owned Reynolds Property Group, which meant I owned 17 buildings including the one currently housing my ex-wife's Instagram photo shoots. Patricia slid the final document across the table. Congratulations, Adrian. You're now in the property management business. How does it feel? Expensive. My hand hurts. Is there champagne? There's always champagne when someone spends this much money. She produced a bottle from somewhere. I suspect she keeps them stocked for occasions exactly like this. And we toasted to what she called the most elaborate real estate revenge plot of the decade. I didn't throw a party, didn't make a big announcement on social media or send out press releases or do any of the performative nonsense that people usually do when they acquire companies. I just smiled, went home to my temporary apartment across town, and drafted a very polite, very professional memo to building management. Well, I say drafted. Patricia's team actually wrote it because apparently there are legal ways to say things and illegal ways to say things, and I kept using the illegal ways because they were more satisfying. The final version read something like, "Dear Reynolds Tower Management Team, please be advised that effective immediately, ownership of Reynolds Property Group has transferred to Hart Enterprises, LLC. Kindly update all access privileges, security protocols, and official documentation to reflect the following. Building owner and primary authority, Mr. Adrian Hart. Please ensure all staff members are informed of this change in ownership structure. Additionally, please begin the process of updating building signage to reflect the new designation, Hart Tower. Thank you for your continued professionalism and service." Professional. Polite. Absolutely devastating if you knew the context. The memo went out on a Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. I made sure it was sent to every single person on the management team, the security staff, the maintenance crew, and all the department heads. I wanted zero confusion about who signed the paychecks now. The building manager called me within 20 minutes, sounding slightly panicked, asking if this was real or some kind of elaborate prank. I assured him it was very real and that his job was safe as long as he followed the new protocols, which seemed to calm him down considerably. Apparently, Jessica missed the email. Actually, several emails. The building management had sent out 3 separate notifications to all residents about the ownership change, and she'd ignored every single one. Probably too busy curating her Instagram feed or writing blog posts about living authentically while using Valencia filter on every photo. Her husband Rick had missed them too, which tracked because the guy had the attention span of a goldfish with ADD. So when she stood there in the lobby that fateful day, shouting about mold and access privileges, and who did I think I was waltzing into her building, I'd felt something close to joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy mixed with a healthy dose of vindication and just a sprinkle of "I told you so" energy. "You can't do this," she'd shrieked, her voice hitting notes that probably shattered glass somewhere in the building. I'd taken a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, the expensive kind from that place downtown that spelled your name wrong on purpose because they thought it was quirky, and smiled. "Technically, I can. I've got the paperwork, the keys, and the Wi-Fi password. You can keep the drama, though. That's all yours." Her face had gone through more color changes than a mood ring in a sauna. "The Wi-Fi password. Changed it yesterday. It's told you so, 2023. Capital T, capital Y, capital S. No spaces." Looking back, maybe that was overkill. But sometimes overkill is exactly the right amount of kill. 2 days after the great lobby eviction, which is what I'd started calling it in my head, complete with capital letters because it deserved that level of respect, I got an invitation in the mail. Not email, actual physical mail, which immediately told me this was either very important or very pretentious. And in circles like these, it was usually both. The envelope was gold. Not yellow, not cream, not champagne-colored, gold. Like someone had melted down a Grammy and turned it into stationery. It was thick too, the kind of paper stock that probably costs more per sheet than my entire grocery bill used to cost per week back in my ramen days. I was sitting in my new office, the one that came with the whole owning a property management company package, when my assistant Jason brought it in on a silver tray like he was auditioning for Downton Abbey. Jason was 26, fresh out of business school, and had the kind of enthusiasm about corporate life that made me simultaneously nostalgic and exhausted. The kid wore 3-piece suits to work every day like he was cosplaying as a 1920s banker, and he took his coffee black because he'd read somewhere that's what powerful people do, even though I'd caught him grimacing after every sip. "This just came by courier, Mr. Hart," Jason said, setting the tray down on my desk with the kind of reverence usually reserved for holy relics or bomb components. The guy who delivered it was wearing a tuxedo. At 11 in the morning. On a Thursday. "Of course he was," I said, picking up the envelope and feeling its weight. Because regular delivery people wearing regular clothes would be too pedestrian for whatever's inside this thing. I opened it carefully, not because I was worried about damaging it, but because I was genuinely curious if gold leaf would flake off and make a mess on my desk. Inside was an invitation printed on cardstock so thick it could probably stop a bullet. The text was in that fancy calligraphy font that takes 5 minutes to read because half the letters look like they're having identity crises. The Montgomery Estates Charity Gala, I read aloud. An evening of elegance and philanthropy benefiting the Children's Literacy Foundation. I flipped the card over. Hosted by Mr. and Mrs. Richard Morrison. Jason's eyes went wide. Wait, isn't Morrison your ex-wife's new last name? Sure is. She didn't waste any time changing it either. Had the paperwork filed before their marriage license probably even dried. I kept reading. Black tie required. $500 minimum donation at the door. Cocktail hour at 7. Dinner at 8. Silent auction throughout the evening. I noticed the smaller text at the bottom and actually laughed out loud. Headline sponsor, Hart Enterprises. I'm sorry, what? Jason moved closer to look at the invitation himself. You're sponsoring a gala that your ex-wife is hosting. Apparently. Though I don't remember signing off on this particular charitable donation. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia, my lawyer, who answered on the second ring because she's pathologically punctual about everything. Please tell me you didn't do something impulsive, she said instead of hello. Why does everyone assume I'm impulsive? I'm very measured, very thoughtful. You bought an entire property company to evict your ex-wife. That was measured spite. Completely different. I put the phone on speaker so Jason could hear. Did we sponsor something called the Montgomery Estates Charity Gala? I heard papers shuffling on her end. Oh, that. Yes. Reynolds Property Group was locked into a 3-year sponsorship agreement with the Montgomery Foundation. It was in the acquisition paperwork, page 237, section 14, subsection C. We inherited all their charitable obligations. So I'm paying to sponsor an event hosted by Jessica and her new husband. Technically, Hart Enterprises is paying. But yes, essentially you're funding your ex-wife's social climbing event. The contract stipulates headline sponsor status, which includes your name, or in this case, your company's name, on all promotional materials, the website, and a banner at the venue. You're also entitled to a VIP table, premium seating, and a speaking opportunity if desired. Jason was trying not to laugh. I could see his shoulders shaking. How much are we paying for this privilege? I asked. $50,000. Jesus. It's tax deductible, Patricia offered. And the Children's Literacy Foundation is actually legitimate. They do good work. So at least your money's going somewhere useful, even if the hosts are. Human migraines in designer clothing? I was going to say challenging, but that works too. After I hung up, Jason was full-on grinning. Are you going to go? Oh, I'm absolutely going. You don't pay 50 grand to sponsor an event and then skip it. That's just poor return on investment. I looked at the invitation again, noting the date. Saturday night, 3 days away. Make sure my tuxedo's cleaned. The Armani one, not the one I wore to the Henderson merger meeting. The one that costs more than my car. That's the one. Also, clear my Saturday evening. And call the venue. What's it say here? The Grand Ballroom at the Lexington Hotel, and confirm my VIP table placement. I want to make sure I'm visible, but not intrusive. Strategic positioning is key. Strategic positioning for what exactly? Jason, my young, innocent assistant. When you're the headline sponsor of an event hosted by people who recently tried to have you removed from your own building, you don't just show up. You make an entrance. You remind everyone in the room who's actually writing the checks. You be so professionally polite and impeccably dressed that it's impossible for anyone to criticize you without looking petty. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also extremely satisfying. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation that would have made military strategists jealous. I had my tuxedo cleaned, pressed, and tailored because apparently I'd lost weight since the last time I wore it. Turns out stress and success are both great for your waistline. I got a haircut from a barber who charged more per hour than some lawyers and had opinions about my sideburns that he shared whether I wanted to hear them or not. I even bought new shoes, these Italian leather things that cost roughly the same as a used motorcycle, but made me feel like I could walk on water or at least on ballroom floors with extra confidence. Saturday evening rolled around with the kind of dramatic timing that only happens in real life when the universe is feeling cinematic. I showed up at the Lexington Hotel at 7:15. Not too early to seem eager, not too late to seem rude, right in that sweet spot of fashionably punctual. The valet parking area was packed with cars that cost more than houses. Bentleys, Maseratis, a Rolls-Royce that probably had its own insurance policy separate from the owner's life insurance. I pulled up in my Aston Martin, recently acquired, tastefully understated in midnight blue, the kind of car that doesn't scream, "Look at me," but whispers, "I could buy and sell you before dessert." The valet was a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, and his eyes went wide when he saw the car. "Holy," he started, then caught himself. "I mean, good evening, sir. Beautiful vehicle. Thanks. Try not to scratch it. It's leased." It wasn't leased. I owned it outright. But there's something about keeping people slightly off balance that I've come to enjoy. I handed him the keys and a $50 bill, then walked toward the hotel entrance where other guests were arriving in clusters, all of them dressed like they were attending the Oscars or a royal wedding. The men wore tuxedos that probably came with instruction manuals. The women wore gowns that defied physics and probably required engineering degrees to put on correctly. And there, right at the entrance, greeting guests with champagne smiles and calculated warmth, stood Jessica and Rick. She was wearing red. Of course she was wearing red, because Jessica believed in making entrances even when she was the host, and technically supposed to be welcoming people, not upstaging them. The dress probably cost more than my first car, which admittedly wasn't saying much because my first car was a 1997 Honda Civic with a broken AC and a mysterious smell that never quite went away. Rick was in a standard tuxedo, looking like every other finance bro at every other formal event, forgettable in that aggressively conventional way. He had his hand on Jessica's back in that possessive gesture guys do when they're insecure about something, which in his case was probably everything. Jessica saw me before I reached the entrance. I watched her face go through that same carnival of emotions I'd seen in the lobby: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally that special kind of horror that comes from realizing you've been outplayed at your own game. I smiled. Not big, not gloating, just pleasant and appropriate, and walked up the steps in my tailored Armani tuxedo, wearing shoes that cost more than her husband's monthly car payment. "Good evening," I said smoothly. "Beautiful venue. Thanks for having me." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Rick looked like he was trying to solve a math problem he didn't have the equation for. I walked past them into the ballroom and thought to myself, Mold's back. And he brought better accessories. The ballroom was exactly what you'd expect from a venue that charged 10 grand just for rental space. Obscenely large, decorated within an inch of its life, and full of people who thought their net worth was a personality trait. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like expensive icicles, throwing light across the room in that calculated way that made everyone look slightly more attractive than they actually were. The walls were covered in that fancy silk wallpaper that costs more per square foot than most people's apartments, and there were flower arrangements so elaborate they probably required their own security detail. I grabbed a champagne flute from a passing waiter, a college kid who looked like he was reconsidering his life choices with every tray he carried, and did a slow scan of the room. The usual suspects were all here: old money trying to stay relevant, new money trying to seem respectable, and a whole bunch of people in between pretending they belonged in either category. I recognized a few faces from the business section of the newspaper, a couple of local politicians who showed up to anything with an open bar and photo opportunities, and at least 3 people I'd pitched my logistics platform to back in the day who'd told me I was too ambitious and didn't understand the market. One of those people, a venture capitalist named Gregory something or other who wore bow ties unironically, actually made eye contact with me from across the room, and I watched his face go through the 5 stages of recognition: confusion, realization, panic, forced smile, and finally that desperate look people get when they're trying to remember if they were an asshole to you in the past and need to do damage control. He started walking toward me, probably to congratulate me on my success and pretend he'd always believed in me. But I smoothly turned and walked in the opposite direction because I wasn't ready to be that forgiving yet. Maybe later. Maybe after my 3rd champagne. I was admiring an ice sculpture that was carved into the shape of a book. Get it? Literacy Foundation? Books. Very clever. When I felt someone approaching with the kind of determined energy that usually precedes a scene. I didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Jessica had this particular way of walking in heels that sounded like a metronome set to aggressive, and I'd been hearing it in my nightmares for the better part of 2 years. "Enjoying your little visit, Adrian?" she said. appearing at my elbow like a designer-dressed ghost with an attitude problem. Her voice was low but sharp, like she was trying to stab me with words while maintaining plausible deniability for anyone watching. She was smiling too, that fake smile people use at formal events when they want to murder you, but can't because there are witnesses and photographers. I took a sip of my champagne before responding, letting her wait just long enough to be annoying. My building's nice this time of year. Glad you kept it clean while you were there. Her smile twitched. Just barely, but I caught it. Your building? That's rich. You showed up with money and a lawsuit. That doesn't make you the owner? Actually, that's exactly what it makes me. Money and legal documentation. That's literally the definition of ownership. I've got the papers and everything. They're very official. Gold seal and all. A woman in a purple gown walked past us, clearly eavesdropping, but pretending to be fascinated by the flower arrangements. Jessica waited until she was out of earshot, sort of, before continuing. You're pathetic. Coming here, to our event, just to gloat. I'm not here to gloat. I'm here because my company is the headline sponsor, which means I paid for about 40% of everything you're currently standing in front of. The flowers? Mine. The ice sculpture? Mine. That champagne you're white-knuckling? Also mine. Well, technically Hart Enterprises, but you get the idea. That's when Rick decided to make his grand entrance into the conversation, walking over with the kind of manufactured confidence that comes from drinking 3 martinis and forgetting you're not actually intimidating. He put his hand on Jessica's shoulder in that territorial way guys do, like he was claiming a park bench. Hart, he said, because apparently we were on last-name basis now. You think owning a few shares in a building makes you someone important? I turned to look at him fully for the first time that evening. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit okay, but not great, the kind you rent when you don't want to admit you rent things. His bow tie was slightly crooked, and there was already a small stain on his shirt that he probably hadn't noticed yet, but I sure did. Not someone, I said, keeping my voice pleasant and even. The landlord. Big difference. Someone is vague. Landlord is specific. I'm specifically the person who determines whether you get to keep living in what you incorrectly believe is your penthouse. Rick's face went through more color changes than a sunset time-lapse. He opened his mouth to respond, probably to say something about lawyers or rights or whatever script guys like him rehearse in the mirror, but he was interrupted by the sound system crackling to life. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice boomed across the ballroom, belonging to Charles Montgomery, the foundation's chairman and a guy who looked exactly like you'd imagine someone named Charles Montgomery would look. Silver hair, expensive tan, teeth that were definitely not the ones he was born with. If I could have your attention, please. We're about to begin the formal portion of our evening. The crowd started moving toward their assigned tables, which were marked with little cards that probably cost $50 each because everything at events like this cost $50 each. I noticed Jessica and Rick reluctantly heading toward the main host table near the stage, and I made my way to my VIP table, which was positioned perfectly, close enough to be prominent, far enough to maintain mystique. Sitting at my table were a few people I didn't know and one person I did, Margaret Shun, a board member of the Literacy Foundation and also, coincidentally, Patricia's aunt. She was in her 60s, wearing an emerald green dress, and had the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she'd already figured out exactly what was happening and was here for the entertainment value. Adrian Hart, she said as I sat down. I was wondering when you'd show up. My niece has told me very interesting things about you. Only good things, I hope. She said you bought an entire company out of spite. I told her that's the best reason to buy anything. Spite and revenge are excellent motivators. Much better than profit margins. I was starting to really like Margaret. Charles Montgomery continued his opening remarks, thanking everyone for coming, praising the foundation's work, throwing around statistics about childhood literacy that were probably accurate but delivered with the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book. Finally, he got to the part I'd been waiting for. And now, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, particularly our headline sponsor, whose generous contribution has made this evening possible. He paused for dramatic effect, which is when I knew he'd been coaching this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Adrian Hart, CEO of Hart Enterprises, the visionary entrepreneur who has not only revitalized Montgomery Estates, but has shown tremendous commitment to our community's youth literacy programs. The applause started, polite at first, then building as people realized they should probably seem enthusiastic about the guy who'd just dropped 50 grand on their charity event. I stood up, buttoning my jacket in that smooth motion you only get after practicing it way too many times in front of a mirror, and walked toward the small stage they'd set up at the front of the ballroom. I could feel Jessica's eyes burning holes in the back of my head. Rick was probably trying to calculate whether he could leave without causing a scene. Margaret was definitely smiling behind her champagne glass. I took the microphone from Charles, who was beaming like a proud parent, completely oblivious to the interpersonal drama unfolding in his fancy ballroom. The spotlight hit my face, which was annoying because now I couldn't see most of the audience, but I could feel them watching, waiting to see what I'd say. "Thank you, Charles, and thank you all for being here tonight." I started, keeping my voice warm and genuine, because rule number one of public speaking is pretending you actually want to be public speaking. The Children's Literacy Foundation does incredible work, and I'm honored that Hart Enterprises can play a small part in supporting their mission. I paused, glancing toward where I knew Jessica and Rick were sitting, even though I couldn't actually see them through the spotlight glare. You know, life has a funny way of bringing us full circle. Sometimes you find yourself in rooms you never expected to be in, supporting causes you care about, surrounded by people who, I let that hang for just a second, might have underestimated what you were capable of. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. They could sense something coming. Some people get thrown out of rooms, metaphorically speaking, of course, just so they can come back owning the entire floor. Or in some cases, the entire building. More laughter now, louder, because wealthy people love a good underdog comeback story, especially when they're watching it happen in real time at an open bar event. But tonight isn't about real estate or business deals. It's about giving kids the tools they need to read, to learn, to build their own success stories. So let's focus on that. Let's make this night count for them. The applause was genuine this time, enthusiastic even. I handed the microphone back to Charles and walked back to my table, where Margaret was full-on grinning. "That was beautifully subtle," she said. "You humiliated them without technically saying anything humiliating. That's an art form." I sat down and picked up my champagne. I had good teachers. Across the room, Jessica was staring at her plate. Rick was checking his phone, probably Googling how to disappear from a gala without anyone noticing. The crowd laughed and chatted and returned to their expensive dinners. Jessica didn't. The formal dinner portion of the gala wrapped up around 10:30, which is the magical hour when rich people decide they've done enough charity for one evening and it's time to get properly drunk on someone else's dime. The silent auction had closed, the speeches had been delivered, and now everyone was migrating toward the various bars scattered around the ballroom like watering holes in a very expensive safari. The DJ? Yes, they'd hired a DJ for a literacy charity event, because nothing says supporting children's education like remixed pop songs from 2015, started playing something with too much bass that made the champagne flutes vibrate on their tables. I was standing near the champagne bar in the corner, the quieter one that most people hadn't discovered yet, because it was tucked behind a decorative column and required actually walking more than 15 feet from the main action. I'd learned a long time ago that the best conversations happen away from the crowds, and the best drinks get poured when the bartender isn't slammed with orders from people who can't decide between Pinot Grigio and Sauvignon Blanc like it's a life-altering decision. The bartender, a guy named Marcus who I'd been chatting with for the past 10 minutes because I'm not above being friendly to service workers, unlike most people in this room, was telling me about his plans to open his own cocktail bar when I felt that familiar presence approaching. You know how they say you can sense when someone's staring at you? It's like that, except it's less mystical and more that Jessica wore the same perfume she'd worn during our entire marriage, and my brain had been trained to associate that particular scent with incoming conflict. "Adrian," she said, appearing around the column like a red-dressed shark that had finally located its prey. Her hair was slightly less perfect than it had been at the beginning of the evening, and there was a tightness around her eyes that suggested the night wasn't going the way she'd planned. "We need to talk." Marcus, bless him, immediately found somewhere else to be, taking his bar towel and disappearing toward the other end of the bar like he'd just remembered urgent business with the ice bucket. Smart man. Probably had experience with domestic disputes masquerading as polite conversation. "We're talking right now," I pointed out, taking a sip of my champagne. It was good champagne too, The kind that doesn't give you a headache the next day because it costs more than most people's car insurance. Unless this is going somewhere specific, in which case, I should probably warn you I've already had 3 glasses of this stuff, and my filter is operating at reduced capacity. Jessica glanced around, checking to see who was in earshot. There were a few couples standing about 10 feet away, pretending to be interested in a painting on the wall that was probably worth more than a house, but looked like someone had sneezed colors onto a canvas. Her friend Melissa, or was it Madison? One of those M names that all sound the same, was hovering near the main bar, very obviously watching us while pretending to text someone. "You love this, don't you?" Jessica hissed, keeping her voice low but somehow managing to make it sound like she was yelling through a megaphone. "It's a skill, really, being passive-aggressive at formal events. They should teach classes. You love humiliating me in front of everyone I know." I considered this while taking another sip of champagne. "Not really," I said, being honest for possibly the first time all evening. "It's just a bonus. Like getting fries with your burger when you only ordered the burger. Unexpected but welcome." Her jaw clenched. She had this thing she did when she was angry where her left eye would twitch slightly, and it was twitching now like it was trying to send Morse code. This whole thing, buying the building, showing up here, that speech, it's all just you trying to prove something. Prove what exactly? That I'm successful? That I survived our divorce? That I can wear a tuxedo without looking like I'm playing dress up? I set my champagne glass down on the bar. "Jessica, here's the thing you never understood about me. I'm not doing any of this to prove anything to you. I'm doing it because I can, and because it turns out I'm actually pretty good at it. You think you've won?" Her voice was getting higher now, that pitch that dogs can probably hear from 3 blocks away. The couple near the painting had stopped pretending to care about art and were now fully invested in our conversation. "You think buying a building and throwing money at a charity makes you better than me? You're still alone, Adrian. You're still the same guy who spent his Friday nights working instead of living. You're still..." "Going to stop you right there," I interrupted, holding up one hand. "First of all, yes, I'm alone. I prefer my own company these days. It's quieter, more predictable, and I actually return my own phone calls, which is more than I can say for some people." I let that sink in for a second. "Second, those Friday nights working? That's what paid for this tuxedo, this building, and about 40% of your party. So maybe let's not criticize the work ethic that's currently funding your social calendar." Melissa or Madison had moved closer, no longer even pretending to be subtle about eavesdropping. She was wearing a silver dress that looked like aluminum foil had evolved into formal wear, and her expression was that perfect mix of scandalized and delighted that people get when they're witnessing drama that doesn't directly involve them. "My social calendar?" Jessica laughed, but it was that bitter laugh people do when they're not actually amused. "God, you really think this is about money, don't you? You think you can just buy your way into respect and happiness?" "I don't think I can buy happiness," I said calmly. "But I can buy excellent champagne, which is pretty close. And respect? That's earned, not bought. I earned mine by building something from nothing while you were busy redecorating the penthouse with my money and pretending you'd manifested abundance." That's when Rick showed up, because of course he did. The man had the timing of a sitcom character written by someone who peaked in the first season. He was loosening his bow tie, actually untying it and letting it hang around his neck like he was in a cologne commercial, and his face had that particular flush that comes from either anger, alcohol, or both. "Everything okay here?" he asked, which was code for, "I'm inserting myself into this situation even though nobody asked me to." "Everything's fantastic," I said brightly. "Your wife and I were just discussing business models and personal growth." Very stimulating conversation. Rick stepped closer, trying to do that thing where guys use their physical presence to be intimidating, except he was maybe an inch taller than me and had definitely skipped leg day for the past decade. "You need to leave Jessica alone. This whole thing," he waved his hand vaguely, encompassing the ballroom, the evening, possibly the entire concept of my existence. "It's harassment. We could get lawyers involved." I actually laughed at that. Couldn't help it. "Lawyers? Buddy, I've got lawyers. I've got a whole firm of lawyers. I've got lawyers who have lawyers." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "And here's the fun part. I've already paid yours." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the DJ transitioning between songs in the other room. Rick's face went through a color palette that would have made a sunset jealous. Red, purple, almost gray. Melissa or Madison had her hand over her mouth like she was trying to hold in a laugh or a gasp or possibly both. What? Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. Your legal fees from the divorce, I explained, speaking slowly like I was addressing children or people who'd had way too much champagne. The firm you used? Thompson, Becker, and Associates? They called me about 6 months ago because you were behind on your payments. Way behind. Like, we're considering collections behind. So I paid it. All of it. $37,000 and some change. Rick started, but I wasn't finished. I paid it because it was easier than listening to your lawyers harass my lawyers about your lawyers not getting paid. And also because there was something deeply satisfying about literally paying for the legal representation that helped take everything from me. It's poetic, in a karmic sort of way. Jessica looked like she'd been slapped with a fish. A expensive fish, but still a fish. Rick was trying to formulate words, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to remember how language worked. Melissa or Madison had pulled out her phone and was definitely texting someone, probably everyone she knew. That shut him up faster than a Wi-Fi outage. I muttered, more to myself than anyone else, but Jessica heard it, and her eyes started twitching again, faster this time. She started. Heading out, actually, I said, checking my watch. It was a Rolex, because at some point I decided if I was going to play the part of successful businessman, I might as well commit to the accessories. Early morning tomorrow. Conference calls with Tokyo. Very important business things that you wouldn't understand because you're too busy manifesting abundance or whatever it is you do now. I nodded to Marcus the bartender, who'd been watching from a safe distance and looked thoroughly entertained. Thanks for the champagne. It was excellent. Then I turned to Jessica and Rick. Thanks for the gala. The ice sculpture was a nice touch. Very literacy themed. And I walked away, leaving them standing by the champagne bar, surrounded by eavesdroppers and social ruin, in a party they'd hosted with my money. Sometimes the best revenge is just showing up and being yourself, especially when yourself is doing significantly better than expected. The Monday morning after the gala, I walked into my office at 8:30 with a coffee and what I thought was going to be a peaceful start to the week. I had 3 meetings scheduled, a contract review that needed my signature, and absolutely zero interest in dealing with drama. The universe, apparently, had other plans, because Jason was already at my door before I'd even set my briefcase down, holding his tablet like it was evidence in a murder trial and looking like he'd just witnessed a car crash in slow motion. We have a problem, he said, which is never how you want your Monday to start. Right up there with we need to talk, and did you get that email I sent at midnight? I hung up my coat, a cashmere number that cost more than my first month's rent back in the warehouse days, and sat down behind my desk. Define problem. Is the building on fire? Did someone embezzle funds? Did you finally admit that 3-piece suits in summer are a crime against comfort? Worse. He thrust the tablet at me like he was serving me a subpoena. You're trending on Twitter. Well, X, whatever we're calling it now. And not in a good way. I took the tablet and scrolled through what can only be described as a dumpster fire of public opinion. Someone, I had a pretty good guess who, had apparently spent their Sunday evening crafting a narrative that painted me as some kind of villain in an expensive suit. The hashtag heartless millionaire was trending locally, which would have been clever if it wasn't so stupid. The first article I clicked on was from some blog called City Elite Insider that I'd never heard of but apparently had enough followers to matter. The headline screamed in all caps, Adrian Hart stole building from ex-wife in elaborate revenge scheme. The article itself was a masterpiece of creative fiction, claiming I'd used insider deals and emotional manipulation to acquire Reynolds Property Group for the sole purpose of evicting Jessica and ruining her life. There were quotes from anonymous sources close to the situation, saying things like, he's obsessed with her, and this is clearly harassment disguised as business. Another article, this one from a slightly more legitimate news site, had gone with the angle, tech millionaire's messy divorce spills into real estate drama. It was more balanced, I'd give them that, but it still painted me as someone who'd let personal vendettas interfere with business decisions, which was only like 30% true if we're being honest. The Twitter, X, comments were even better. People who'd never met me, never heard of me before this weekend, had suddenly decided they knew exactly what kind of person I was. Typical rich guy behavior, one comment read. Can't handle rejection, so he uses money as a weapon. Another one said, imagine being so petty you buy a whole building just to kick out your ex small dick energy. That one had 3,000 likes. I handed the tablet back to Jason. Well, that's certainly a creative interpretation of events. Creative. Jason's voice cracked slightly. He was pacing now, which he did when he was stressed, wearing a path in the carpet that was probably going to be visible by the end of the day. Adrian, they're trying to ruin you. This is character assassination. We need to respond. We need to put out a statement, call our PR team, maybe get lawyers involved. Jason, take a breath. You're going to pass out, and I don't know CPR well enough to risk a lawsuit. But, sit down, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat, but he looked like a coiled spring ready to launch. Let them try. I've got better PR. Better PR? Adrian, have you seen these comments? People are calling you everything from a narcissist to a, he glanced at the tablet, capitalist sociopath with emotional constipation. That last one doesn't even make sense medically. I leaned back in my chair. The expensive ergonomic one that I'd bought after my back started protesting the warehouse sleeping bag days. You know what's funny about internet outrage? It has the attention span of a goldfish with ADHD. Give it 48 hours, and they'll be mad about something else. A celebrity will say something stupid, a politician will do something corrupt, someone will post a bad take about pineapple on pizza. This will blow over. And if it doesn't, then we'll deal with it. But we're not going to panic and make it worse by looking defensive. I pulled up my email on my computer, scanning through the morning's messages. About 40 of them were from reporters asking for comments, which I was going to ignore with the kind of professional detachment I perfected over the years. Also, I might have already handled it. Jason's eyes narrowed. What do you mean, might have already handled it? You know that meeting I had scheduled for 6 this morning? The one you thought was weird because who has meetings at 6 a.m. on a Monday? The one you wouldn't tell me about? That's the one. I pulled up a folder on my desktop, clicked on a document, and turned my monitor so Jason could see it. It was a press release from the Heart Foundation, a charitable organization I'd set up about 6 months ago, but hadn't really publicized because I'm not one of those people who needs a parade every time they donate money. This morning, I finalized a $3 million donation to build transitional housing for single fathers who are starting over after divorce or separation. Jason stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. $3 million? $3 million. The complex will be built on that lot near downtown that's been sitting empty for 5 years. 12 units, fully furnished, subsidized rent for up to 2 years while the residents get back on their feet. Job placement assistance, counseling services, childcare support. The whole package. I've been working on it for months, but the timing to announce it just happened to work out really well. Jason started laughing, the kind of slightly unhinged laughter that comes from stress relief. You're using philanthropy as a PR counteroffensive? I prefer to think of it as doing something good that also happens to make me look good. Multitasking. I closed the document. The press release goes out in about, I checked my watch, 15 minutes. I've already got 3 news outlets ready to run with it, including that morning show that all the suburban moms watch while drinking coffee. By noon, the narrative shifts from heartless millionaire evicts ex-wife to successful entrepreneur gives back to community. Jason was scrolling through his tablet again, probably already seeing the early posts. This is actually brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. I prefer strategically benevolent. I stood up and grabbed my coffee, which had gone lukewarm but was still drinkable. Also, it's not evil if I'm actually helping people. Those 12 units are going to make a real difference for families who need it. The fact that it also makes me look good is just efficient resource allocation. By 10 a.m., the story had started to shift. I watched it happen in real time, which was fascinating in a slightly dystopian way. The same blogs that had been trashing me were now running articles with headlines like Heart of Gold, Millionaire's Secret Charity Work Revealed, and From Divorce to Philanthropy, Adrian Hart's Redemption Story. The Twitter narrative was changing too, with people suddenly remembering that maybe they shouldn't rush to judgment based on one-sided gossip. My favorite comment, which I absolutely did not screenshot and save even though Jason claims he saw me do exactly that, said, "Y'all were really out here calling this man heartless, and he's literally building housing for struggling dads. Maybe log off and touch grass." By lunchtime, Jason came back into my office with an actual smile on his face. Okay, I have to hand it to you. The story's completely flipped. Channel 7 just ran a segment about the housing project. They interviewed one of the architects and 3 people from the Single Fathers Support Network who are calling you a hero. I'm not a hero, I said, signing the contract I'd been reviewing. I'm just a guy with money who decided to use it for something useful instead of buying another car I don't need. Channel 7's anchor literally said, Adrian Hart, from divorce drama to community champion. You're untouchable now. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a small smile. No one argues with a man funding charity, especially when he owns their building's mortgage and has receipts for everything. Jason laughed. What about Jessica? She's got to be losing her mind right now. Probably, but that's not my problem anymore. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. Come on, we've got that site inspection at 2. Let's go see what $3 million of good PR looks like when it's actually helping people. As we left the office, Jason said, You know, for someone who claims they're not into revenge, you're really good at it. That's because this isn't revenge, I said, hitting the elevator button. Revenge would be petty and temporary. This is just me living well, which they say is the best revenge, except I'm also building houses for people who need them, so really everyone wins. Except the people who were spreading lies about me. They just look dumb. So it's revenge with benefits? It's philanthropy with timing. There's a difference. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight back directly. It's to do something so genuinely good that your critics look like assholes for criticizing you in the first place. That's not revenge. That's just strategy. That night, I was sitting in my temporary apartment, the one I'd been renting across town while I figured out what to do with the penthouse situation, drinking a scotch that cost more than my weekly grocery budget used to cost, and staring out at the city lights like I was in some kind of noir film. It was around 11:30, late enough that most normal people were either asleep or pretending they were going to sleep soon, and my phone lit up on the coffee table with a number I hadn't seen in months but still recognized immediately, because some things get burned into your brain whether you want them there or not. Jessica. I stared at the phone for 3 rings, debating whether to answer or let it go to voicemail and deal with whatever this was in the morning when I had more emotional energy and fewer drinks in my system. But curiosity won out. It always does, and I picked up on the 4th ring. Hello, I said, keeping my voice neutral, the kind of neutral you use when you're talking to telemarketers or ex-wives who might be calling to yell at you. There was a pause on the other end, long enough that I almost thought she'd pocket-dialed me, which would have been both disappointing and hilarious. Then I heard her breathe, and when she spoke, her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't that weaponized tone she'd used at the gala or in the lobby or during approximately 80% of our marriage. It was quiet, tired, almost vulnerable, which was so unlike Jessica that I actually checked my phone screen to make sure I'd answered the right call. You really went through with it, she whispered, and I could hear something in her voice that might have been admiration or might have been defeat or might have been both fighting for dominance. The housing project, the donation, everything. You made everyone adore you. I took a sip of my scotch, letting the burn settle before responding. I didn't make them adore me, Jess. I just stopped caring if they didn't. Turns out when you stop performing for other people's approval, you accidentally become more likable. Who knew? There was silence on the line. Not the angry silence that used to fill our apartment during fights, but something different. Thoughtful, maybe. I could hear traffic in the background on her end, which meant she was either outside or had a window open, and I wondered where she was and why she'd chosen tonight to call. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. I'm sorry. I sat up straighter on the couch, nearly spilling my drink because those were 2 words I never thought I'd hear from Jessica Morrison, formerly Jessica Hart, formerly the woman who'd told me during our divorce proceedings that she had nothing to apologize for because personal growth sometimes requires leaving people behind. That was a direct quote. I'd written it down at the time because it was so absurd I needed documentation. I didn't gloat, didn't throw it back in her face, didn't do any of the things I'd imagined doing during those long nights in the warehouse when I was building my company and running on spite and instant coffee. I just stared out the window at the city lights and said what I'd wanted to say for 2 years, but never had the chance to. I never wanted to take what was yours, Jess. The building, the penthouse, any of it. I just wanted peace. I wanted to not feel like a failure every time I saw your Instagram posts or heard through mutual friends about your new life. I wanted to build something that was mine. She sighed, and it was the kind of sigh that carries weight, the kind that says everything words can't quite capture. I don't know who I am without the heart name, she said, and there was something raw in her voice that made me remember why I'd married her in the first place. Back before the money and the status and the Instagram followers became more important than actual human connection. I chuckled, not meanly, just with the kind of sad understanding that comes from watching someone struggle with something you've already figured out. That's the problem, Jess. You kept the name, but you lost the meaning. Heart isn't just a name. It's not a brand or a status symbol or something you put on your lifestyle blog to get clicks. It meant something once. It meant building something real, working for something that mattered, being someone beyond the designer clothes and the penthouse views. I know, she whispered. Do you, though? Another pause. Longer this time. I heard her breathe, heard what might have been traffic or might have been wind, heard the silence of two people who used to know everything about each other trying to remember how to talk like human beings instead of opposing lawyers. I should let you go, she finally said. I wanted you to know that I see what you're doing. The housing project. Helping those families. That's the Adrian I married. Before everything got complicated. Everything was always complicated, Jess. We just pretended it wasn't. Yeah, we did. She paused. Good night, Adrian. Good night. The line went dead, and I sat there holding my phone, staring at the call log showing 4 minutes and 37 seconds of conversation that felt like it should have been either much longer or much shorter. I finished my scotch and poured another, smaller this time, and thought about apologies and growth and whether people can actually change or if they just get better at pretending. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the point wasn't whether Jessica was genuinely sorry or just performing remorse. Maybe the point was that I didn't need the apology anymore. I'd already moved on. A week after Jessica's phone call, I was back in the penthouse. My penthouse now, officially, legally, all the paperwork signed and filed and notarized by people who charge way too much to witness signatures. The moving company had cleared out all of Jessica's stuff the previous Tuesday. 3 guys who didn't ask questions and didn't make eye contact, just packed boxes and carried furniture like they were defusing bombs instead of relocating throw pillows that probably cost more than their weekly paychecks. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the ones that overlooked the entire city and made you feel like a character in a movie about successful people with emotional problems, when Mark the concierge knocked on the door. He was holding a small envelope, the fancy kind that comes with wedding invitations or announcements that someone died and left you money. This just appeared at the desk, Mr. Hart, he said, handing it over with the kind of careful reverence people use when they're not entirely sure what they're delivering. No courier, no postage. Someone just left it with your name on it. I took the envelope, which was cream-colored and heavy, the kind of paper that suggested whoever sent it had opinions about stationery. Thanks, Mark. Hey, you settling in okay with all the changes around here? Better than expected, honestly. The new management structure is way more organized than the old one. Also, the coffee in the break room is actually good now, which is basically a miracle. I upgraded the coffee budget. Life's too short for bad coffee. After Mark left, I opened the envelope carefully, half expecting it to be another legal document or a passive-aggressive note from Jessica about something I'd forgotten to forward to her storage unit. Instead, it was a single card with handwriting I recognized immediately, even though I hadn't seen it in years. You earned this. Be proud. No signature. Just those 5 words in handwriting that looked eerily like my late uncle's. Uncle Martin, the man who'd raised me after my parents died. The same man who'd told me at my college graduation that I'd never amount to anything because I didn't have the killer instinct for real success. He'd been wrong about that, spectacularly wrong. But he'd been dead for 3 years, so I couldn't exactly call him up and gloat about it. I stared at the note for a long time, trying to figure out where it came from. Maybe someone found it in his old papers. Maybe Jessica had discovered it while packing and decided to send it as some kind of peace offering. Maybe I was losing my mind and imagining things because I'd been drinking too much expensive scotch and not sleeping enough. Didn't really matter, I decided. The message was true regardless of who wrote it, or when, or why. I walked back to the window, holding the note, looking out at the city that had once kicked me out and now spread below me like I owned it. Which, in a very specific real estate sense, I kind of did. At least this building. At least this moment. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. Older than the guy who'd carried boxes past Jessica's designer heels 2 years ago. Definitely more expensive looking in the tailored shirt and pants that fit like they were engineered by NASA, but maybe not that different underneath all the upgrades. Still the same person who preferred doing his own heavy lifting. Still the guy who'd rather work Friday nights than pretend to enjoy parties. Still someone who measured success and problems solved instead of zeros in bank accounts, even though the zeros were nice too. Calmer though. Older, sure, but also wiser in that way people claim to be in LinkedIn posts, but rarely actually are. I wasn't angry anymore. Wasn't running on spite and instant noodles and the desperate energy of someone trying to prove the world wrong. I'd already proved it. The building was mine. The company was thriving. The housing project was breaking ground next month. Jessica had apologized, or at least acknowledged reality, which was close enough. I wasn't after revenge anymore. That ship had sailed, and honestly, it had been less satisfying than advertised. Revenge is like junk food. Tastes great in the moment, but leaves you feeling empty afterward. What I wanted now was peace. Actual peace. The kind where you wake up without immediately checking your phone to see who's trying to destroy you on social media. The kind where you can drink your overpriced coffee and look at your city view without mentally calculating how much you paid for the privilege. I raised my glass, scotch again, because some habits are worth keeping, toward my reflection in the window, and said quietly, to myself and the empty penthouse and maybe the ghost of Uncle Martin if he was listening, to mold. It grows, adapts, survives the scrubbing, and eventually owns the whole damn wall. My reflection smiled back. Not smugly, not victoriously, just peacefully. Outside, the city kept moving, lights flickering on and off as people lived their lives completely unaware that some guy in a penthouse was having a philosophical moment about fungus metaphors and personal growth. That was fine. They didn't need to know. This moment was mine. I'd earned it.